to get your workout done first.
Yeah, I should have.
I mean, it is 11:30 there. What have you been doing for the last 7 hours?
I don't know. I mean, I guess just not being efficient with my time. OTB in 10 fantasy banter to end 2020, and what an ending it was. We have, for only the second time in league history, we've got a two-time champion. We have a two-time champion, and not only that, we've got a two-time champion in just 3 years in the league, as Greatest Show on Paper completed their Cinderella journey all the way to the Super Bowl, and in winning that Super Bowl against PTT, they have now really cemented themselves into the history books. More on that in a second, but I'd love to bring Garcia into the conversation. What will stand out to you as you look at GSOP from a legacy standpoint, or even just from a 2020 season standpoint?
Oh, from a legacy standpoint, it is miraculous that somebody can come into the league in such a short time frame and win 2 out of 3 years, which it goes to show you don't need to be smart to win this league. But clearly you need to have 2 people running your operation. I mean, I don't know. It's impressive, but at the same time, should surprise any of us when we're filled with owners like wristbands and yourself and me, where we clearly think we know what we're doing, but we don't. So, I'm more disappointed for the guys that didn't win this year because, when you look at the standings and you look at the numbers from this past weekend, no disrespect to Greatest Show on Paper and PDT. It was a formidable matchup, and they deserved the opportunity. They clearly did everything right to get there. But really, that championship game was Waverman versus Ian in Sweet Home Chicago. I mean, I thought we were going to have like a 300-point performance by Ian at one point. So it was impressive to see him kind of come off this night after a disappointing loss, and kind of just make up for the fact that last year he finished second. This year he's finishing third overall. So maybe next year's first. I don't know how it works. It usually go 2-1 as opposed to 2-3. But Greatest Show on Paper looking over his draft. As much as we sometimes say, draft is a crapshoot. He had a great plan going in, and the players that he started with in the draft, got him to the promised land with Aaron Jones and Nick Chubb. Mike Evans wasn't even until like the 5th round, and the man put up 36 points. Quick observation for PTT was I don't know how he got here. I really don't, because that's a testament to his shrewdness and his ability to make moves on the free agent wire and stick with guys that I probably would have done months ago. But I guess if he had Devontae Adams on his roster this past weekend, he would have won by a landslide. So I guess the moral of the story is somebody should have traded with me for Devontae Adams, and it would have been a chance.
Yeah. I think clearly Devontae Adams needed a new home, both because of the toxic environment that you were providing him down the stretch by trying to trade him to anybody that would listen, as well as to the fact that clearly he may have benefited some other team more than he seemed to benefit yours. Greatest Show on Paper, you mentioned the draft strategy, and we should start there. There are many different ways to win in fantasy football, depending on your league size, depending on your lineup structures, depending on, honestly, the other teams that are in the league with you. But Greatest Show on Paper continues a trend that we have been seeing in this league, particularly as the lineups have gotten deeper and deeper. In that, if you look at that draft strategy, 5 of the first 6 picks were running backs. This is basically the 3rd straight year that a team with a running back focused draft strategy didn't necessarily always work out perfectly as planned, but that a team that went into a draft with a running back focused draft strategy ends up hoisting the OTB Super Bowl trophy at the end of the year. Now, granted, PTT did almost the inverse. They had a lot of injuries that made their lineup look, a little less than great at the end of the year. But remember, this is the team that had Michael Thomas, Odell Beckham, and Will Fuller. Now, Michael Thomas obviously never worked out the way we hoped he would. OBJ got hurt. Will Fuller got hurt. But this is a team that somewhat did the Ian approach from last year, which is to say, try to really build out the other skill players. It should be referenced, of course, that down the stretch, PTT had a very tough time finding running backs to start, because that is what happens in deep leagues. If you do not have a good stable of running backs, they are not easy to get on waivers. You got to get a little lucky with injury or with elevated, positional players that maybe you don't look to, third options that end up ascending during the year, that kind of thing. You're not necessarily just going to be able to pluck someone like you might be able to pluck a startable receiver. The other thing that I think is interesting is the quarterback conversation. Because I think two things are true in the quarterback conversation. Number one, you don't necessarily have to draft one early. We've seen that time and time again. But number two, you do need to have one, right? So you look at PTT, they got Josh Allen in like the 11th round. He ends up being, at time of this broadcast, we'll see what happens next week, the QB1 in the entire league this year. So yes, he waited for him, but he also needed him to fuel that team down the stretch. Granted, on paper, it's a little more complicated. Justin Herbert, even adjusted for just the games he's played in, is only QB9. So it's not like they've lit it up with the quarterback. That said, in all but I think one game, he has at least performed to manageable, competent expectation. You just can't have these guys giving you 7-8 point games. Granted, on paper had a strong lineup. I think if they had a really top tier quarterback the entire year, they probably would have been in the realm of where Waverman or where Sweet Home Chicago is or was. But that said, they had a quarterback that at least got them there. But again, two very different quarterback approaches. And, again, there's a lot of different ways to win, I guess, is the moral of this story.
There's a lot of ways to win, and in my case, there's a lot of ways to lose, too. But, according to my draft recap, I was kind of almost there. I almost matched what they predicted on the recap. I was projected 3-10. I think I finished 4-9, and, I did finish 9th overall. So we might want to start taking to heart these NFL.com draft recaps. Maybe the others might want to look at what their recap was at the beginning to see how well they did on that end. But I got a B, so I guess that's better than nothing in terms of draft kit. I could have gotten an incomplete. And it did say that Devin Singletary was a good selection, so I stick with it. Second round overall, pass on guys like Aaron Jones and Mike Evans and Travis Kelce. Devin Singletary will go down in the record books for Sanchez and Butthead as the worst pick ever. And maybe for this league too, but I'm sure there's some others we'd have to look in the annals to see if there's some names there that might pop up. But on your quarterback situation, I think it's funny because you're talking about Justin Herbert, who wasn't even the starter for the Chargers. It took a collapse lung, I think, or some malpractice of Tyrod Taylor to give Justin Herbert the nod, and great to show on paper, credit to them. They saw the writing on the wall that Justin Herbert was going to be the future quarterback of the Chargers, and they figured, let's just ride with him. And then, to your point, Josh Allen was a guy that, a lot of hype, the past few years, but didn't really materialize. And then here he is. And I think a lot has to do with the fact that Stephon Diggs was a legitimate receiver and John Brown was a great component to that offense. And, they made it work. What I noticed, though, is like a team like All Aboard the Baby Bus, who had two superb quarterbacks and possibly the MVP of the NFL on his roster in Aaron Rodgers, where one has to wonder, you have that talent, why don't you make assets of that talent and drive to get some more players to where instead of winning a consolation bracket, maybe you're playing for the championship. And that's just a little bit of a head scratcher. I think we sometimes covet these quarterbacks too much, and we worry about these injuries. And I know Pat Mahomes is a great QB himself, but after a while, having two great QBs doesn't really materialize into anything because you're going to be allowed to play one. So maybe there's a roster situation there that we have to fix. Maybe we're allowed to have two quarterbacks on the starting lineup. That's something to consider as we head into the offseason, because there's going to be a slew of rule changes or suggestions, rather. I hope that we do away with some of this nonsense that this league has got into with 12 different flex players, 17 tight ends to play. So let's get back to basics. Let's bring back defense. Let's bring back kickers. Let's get back to the old way and where we're playing hardcore football and none of this archaic stuff.
Yeah, it's a good segue as we talk 2020 highlights, and I'll actually kind of dovetail what you were talking about with quarterbacks kind of into the 2020 highlights, which for me is when you look at a team or a series of teams like the Waverman and Sweet Home Chicago. That's the elephant in the room, right? Those are two clubs that I think a lot of people would have bet that would have won the title. And some of this is honestly just bad luck. It's a single elimination tournament. Okay, we got audience here for this wonderful broadcast. Some of this is just bad luck, single elimination tournaments. It happens. The other part of it, though, is that you look at a squad like Waverman, what happens when you do have yourself a situation where you're somewhat grounded by quarterbacks. So Russell Wilson as the example. You're never going to sit Russell Wilson because especially, the name alone, but also because of the fact that he was killing it and looked like he was having an MVP season early in the year. It is not too bold to say that as much as a lot of this was bad luck for Waverman, Russell Wilson not putting up the numbers that he needed to was one of the reasons why Waverman went from uncatchable to, on a given week with the right mix of lineup against him, he all of a sudden became, human again. He was mortal. He was possible to be caught. You talked about all aboard the baby bus. So, you draft Patrick Mahomes, you draft Aaron Rodgers. I can only assume that you draft Aaron Rodgers because you hope for exactly what happens, which is he kills it and you have trade bait. Because you're never going to sit Patrick Mahomes. He tried that one time this year. Didn't work out for him. You're never going to sit Patrick Mahomes. So when that happens, what's the threshold, though? Because it's a quarterback, right? And there is always going to be this perception that quarterbacks are, streamable. Even though I can tell you from experience this year that it's a lot like changing lines or changing traffic, changing lanes in a traffic jam. The minute you go into the next lane, the lane you were in all of a sudden starts moving faster. So it's not great to have to stream quarterbacks. That said, the perception is you can do it. And so what you can get back for a quarterback, no matter who that quarterback is, it's just never going to be the expectation of what you'd want in return. So what happens? You end up sitting on the quarterback all year, you end up clogging up a bench spot, and it ends up being an inefficient draft strategy. So there's a lot there to parse and parcel. What are your thoughts, Garcia? What will stand out to you, either team or strategy or whatever, in 2020?
I was really excited to see the all aboard the baby bus philosophy, having kind of those two players, Dalvin Cook and Pat Mahomes. I really think he was on to something there, and clearly it was working incredibly well until it stopped. No fault of his. Again, to your point, though, the quarterback situation is one that, we go back and forth on it, feeling like you have to have yourself a top-tier quarterback. But then you look at Shipwreck and where they were able to do so well with, I think, Ryan Tannehill as their quarterback. And, is that something that needs to be carefully looked at moving forward when you draft? You say, do I put all my marbles in one quarterback, or do I just find, again, a B to C level quarterback and put all my attention to running backs and wide receivers? Speaking of that, moving forward, depending on the rule situations, what new changes might come into play, this philosophy of just piling on running backs seems to be working, as evidenced by what you did 2 years ago, and now greatest show on paper. But at the same time, Ian seems to have a formula that really works well. So I guess that's a good thing because it adds some parity to the league and not one size fits all. So it gives people the options to kind of figure out how things are laid out during the draft. One of the things that concerns me about our league, though, is that, we seem to have a trend here. We're getting to a point now where a lot of the same teams are kind of in that championship round, and I'm afraid that some people just aren't putting all their time and attention and heart to it. Or maybe we have to really re-examine the league, and maybe we have too many teams. Maybe we have to do a purge of some sort.
Is this going to be a relegation again? Are we going to relegate?
I'm just putting it out there because maybe it's not even so much the teams that aren't like Sidebar, greatest show on paper. Maybe they're just too good for this league. We create a second league, a premier higher league that's maybe $1,000 to participate.
It's a really great idea.
This is an idea session.
I like it. Yeah, it's interesting, and I will say, as you look at that graphic, there are still things that you just don't see, and one of those things is Sweet Home Chicago. I don't think we talked about Sweet Home Chicago enough this year. Obviously, down the stretch, we talked a lot about GSOP, we talked about PTT, we talked to a degree even about, WB making his second consecutive playoff appearance after never making it. We talk about Ship finding his way to the postseason almost every year. The problem with Sweet Home Chicago was they were second in everything, right? They were second in knockout. They were second in points. The money is reflective of that. So as much as, the money is really not necessarily the reason why we get so invested in this game, for as bad luck of a season that Waverman had, they still managed $175 because of winning knockout and regular season points. Sweet Home Chicago goes home with 25, even though their team was much more reflective of a higher, prize purse than that. And you're right. This is the second consecutive year. We talked a little bit about it last week, that they had a dominant draft that was not focused on running backs. It's interesting that they traded for running backs later in the year. It does tell you that there's some importance in still having that balance. But they went receiver-focused again. They hit again. They had a phenomenal year again. So a lot of the final championship count won't be reflective of some of that. The teams maybe we don't talk about enough because they didn't quite get there, but they were still great.
Right. I guess the last thing that comes to mind, too, is just, no matter where you pick, injuries could come haunt you, and just talk to the likes of regulators, Gronk, even myself. PTT with Michael Thomas. It's, it's a concern, and really makes you wonder if having the first pick overall really makes much of a difference. So
Yeah,
that's another thing that we'll have to closely examine as we head into the off season. Is it even worth doing a draft?
Okay, I don't know if we have to get so existential about everything.
I'll find a way.
We can point out like an issue and not have an existential crisis about it.
But how about you and I select which players go where?
I like that. That's actually really. It's interesting though. You pointed out, and again, there are a variety of reasons why this is true. But going into this year, there are certain things that we felt most confident about. Right? Christian McCaffrey was RB1. Lamar Jackson was QB1. Michael Thomas was wide receiver 1. How did those 3 bets work out for you? Now, again, it's not to say that we can predict why. In the case of all of those players, well, no, not necessarily Lamar, but in 2 of those 3 players, injuries were the biggest factor as to why. But it might be kind of a piece of humble pie for us, for fantasy experts, and everybody else as we go into the spring and summer. Don't be so certain that the guy you think is at the top of the leaderboard, and the data tells you every year, even though it can't predict why, the data says every year you're going to be wrong. The data says that the guy that you say is going to be RB1, wide receiver 1, QB1 isn't not only not going to be there, they're not even going to place. They're not even going to be in the top 5. And yet we do it every year. We're so confident. Maybe we won't be as overconfident next year. Maybe. We'll see. But let's shift over. Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Unless they watch the show before the draft.
I will say one other thing. Aaron Jones on the OTB championship squad 3 straight years now. Garcia, your thoughts? Maybe that should be your first overall pick next year.
It's fitting that you and I passed on him in the second round.
It is.
And the reason why is because he just gets injured too much and he's just unreliable. And, well, I mean, he did get injured and he missed a few weeks. But, you know, it's the long game in our fantasy league. It's not the short game. And clearly we have neither going for us.
It is. It's a good segue into a few updates of the record books. We'll go through this quickly. Let's start with championships. As you can see, greatest show on paper now tied with Cincinnati, the only 2 clubs in OTB through 9 seasons to have more than one championship. They both have 2. There are 4 other teams, your 2 co-hosts among them, along with All Aboard the Baby Bus and PTT, that have the 1 title. Let's move on to most points. This is most points in a season. Now, again, we bracket this by saying these are PPR records. Ship still will forever have the non-PPR record for points in a season. Sidebar is still on top from his 2019 season at just over 1,600 points. But Waverman, about 35 points short of that, would end up being in the 2 spot. Gronk TDs and Sweet Home Chicago round out that top 4. Moving on to average wins in a season. Because everybody started at different points in this league, we don't think it's fair to just say most wins. So we look at the average wins reflective of each season you've been in. Ship now with the sole possession of first place there. Ship and Sidebar, the only 2 clubs that are actually above 7. Waverman and Cincinnati tied, so to speak, for 3rd. Playoff appearances, and this is starting to become a trend. Shipwreck now put some distance between them and the other clubs. Shipwreck now 8 playoff appearances in 9 seasons. Sidebar is 2nd. We got the league nemesis out in a graphic. Congratulations to you. Both him and Waverman are tied for 3rd with 5 playoff appearances. And then finally, and I like this one, I actually cut it short because I just thought it was kind of poetic, this most points in a game. Sweet Home Chicago is your number 1 and your number 2. Again, this is a PPR record, but 180 points you may remember that they had in 2019. Last year they did that. This year, 179. They just did it in the 3rd place game. Those are your leaders. That is your updated record books. We could probably go deeper, but for the sake of your boredom, we shall not. Garcia, where do you want to take this? Records? You want to talk closing thoughts for the year? What do you want to talk about as our time winds down here?
What do I want to talk about based on that?
You don't have to. Pick your topic.
I mean, you know what? Records are meant to be broken. And the great thing is next year is a whole new season for us. And, there's a possibility that you might break some records. I might break a record. Probably not. But again, these records are meant to be broken. Kudos to Sweet Home Chicago, though, for putting up some huge numbers again. I really thought he was going to get in that 200 threshold and blow us all away with that. And at the same time, it's kind of just some poetry to that, where he had such a miserable week before that and when it mattered most. And then when it really didn't matter, he outperformed Waverman, who gave a valiant fight. In terms of the championships, we need some new faces up there. I'm not going to lie. Maybe, just maybe, although the screen changed, we need the likes of Shipwreck to have the opportunity to hold that trophy, or Ian, or Waverman. I'm rooting for these guys. Maybe not wristbands, but I'm rooting for those other guys. Gronk. I think I picked him in week 3 to win it all. I don't know what the hell happened to that guy. I think he might have been in the championship with the consolation prize. All aboard the baby bus, although he's been up there. It was, again, these guys need to get up there more often than we do. With the exception of me. You certainly need to take a side. You seem to be the guy that everybody hates, and yet you don't want to admit it, and then you throw it at me. But in reality, they hate you more than they hate me. They enjoy me. That's how I look at it. That's why this league is great.
I don't know if that's true anymore, considering that, as you just pointed out, I think you single-handedly jinxed almost every club in OTB.
No, it's not called jinx. It's beginning to establish who is, a real threat and who's not, and who's going to take who's going to take the prediction of winning it all and really kind of say, you know what, yes, I am good, and they're going to make that effort. They're going to make that trade to get themselves up to the next level. Some teams just weren't willing to do it. They just kind of wanted to have it more as like, oh, let's just play this little fun game that we have going on here. People crack under pressure. Clearly you do.
I wouldn't go that far. It's just
Daniel Jones.
Well, again,
Kenyon Drake.
I don't want to talk about Kenyon Drake. I will say that fortune favors the bold, but also you leave yourself vulnerable. That's another lesson for this year. You never know exactly what risks will work out and which ones won't, and the incremental size of the risk seems to amplify whether it's going to be really good or really bad for you. One thing I did not mention that I should as we kind of segue into the 2021 offseason. Yes, we are going to segue into the 2021 offseason. All aboard the baby bus, your boy, is the consolation bracket winner. They will have 4 ping pong balls on draft lottery night, double any other team's ping pong count as we look at setting the draft order for 2021. We will, of course, be taking a hiatus, as we always do this time of year. But remember that we will call at some point in the next few months for ballot items. And this is the last thing I'll give Garcia. I'm sure he's got a platform. But we will talk about ballot items, as always, the same process. We will send you guys the open call. Anything that you'd like to be on the ballot, we will allow in. I will say that I'm actually going to try to work with league managers this year, though, in an effort to help you, really. If 2 league managers come up with a similar thing, remove this position or do this, but it's a little different, I'm actually going to let you both know and say, do you want to kind of work together for some bipartisan legislation, because the chances of you guys putting one kind of cohesive element on there versus 4 different reasons to bring kickers back will probably benefit your chances of getting it passed. You don't have to. If you still think your particular protocol is different, you want it, whatever. But I am going to try to streamline it a little bit if people have multiple similar things to try to make sure that you're putting your best foot forward. Garcia, closing thoughts on ballot, on offseason, on 2020, on anything you would like to share as we wind down a remarkable 2020 year.
I wouldn't call it remarkable, but yeah, it was one for the ages. I'm just wondering if all aboard the baby bus is ready to make his first round pick, number 1 overall, Jalen Hurts. As an Eagle, that makes the most sense. In terms of ballot items, again, I think we just have to be mindful of the fact that, this is all about having fun. So let's not get really weird with our ballot item suggestions. And while I give you a nod to trying to create a bipartisan approach to this at the same time, I just hope others do not want to get on the train with you of certain rule changes, because at the end of the day, these rules and these ballot items are to defeat you, keep you down. And I need to preface over and over again that you are the league enemy, the nemesis of our league, and we need to find ways to keep you down. We don't want to see you raising another trophy for another 20 years, if I have it my way. Maybe never again. It might give you 1 in 20 years.
Thank you.
But again, we have to formalize a plan, much like how the Republicans and the Democrats do it in the government, where they just, find ways to block things. We need to make sure we block anything that would benefit you. So let's move forward now, and let's all just get on the right path here in terms of kind of keeping you at bay. I can't wait for some of these ballot suggestions. I've got a notepad. It's at least 10 pages long now, probably double that in size the next week or so. And let's hope that 2021 doesn't have a season where we've got to worry about inactives related to COVID or some odd things that are going on. But the one thing I worry about with the season that we just experienced is that it becomes a norm where then all of a sudden the Detroit Lions have an interim coach to the interim coach to the interim coach. And then they picked up like 7 guys off their practice squad to play. I mean, it just wasn't fair what I saw on Saturday night with Tampa and Detroit. So much like how my team looked on a daily basis, where I had guys come off a practice squad. So it wasn't the best of performance. But the season's over. We can put it behind us for those that didn't do well, like you and me. And for those that did great, relish this, enjoy the taste of victory for the likes of Greatest Show on Paper. And I wish you well on trying to repeat and join the echelons of Cincinnati. We're going to do everything in our power to not make that happen. I look forward to seeing you start 0-12 next year.
I hope not. I hope now that the jinx of the defending champion, which has actually been a thing the last 4 years now.
I'm going to predict right now you're going to win it all.
I'm not going that far. I'm just saying I hope that Greatest Show on Paper, I hope, does not have the 2019 they had after 2018. I had my 2020.
You want another repeat of 2019 because if that bodes well for you, that gives you another chance.
That's fair. I'm going
to go out there and say you'll win it all next year. And I'm going to go ahead and put it out there that wristbands will finish second. So we'll watch this back a year from now.
I will tell you.
Come true. And I hate admitting the fact that you win, but I'm only saying it to jinx you.
No, I know. I understand.
I jinx people.
I understand that, but putting wristbands in is like this weird reverse jinx. It might actually become true now.
How great would it be for you and wristbands to be in a championship and you lose to him?
It wouldn't be good.
How great would that be for the league?
I don't know if anybody wants that. I certainly don't. And I don't know. I mean, WB probably would, but I don't know that anybody else.
What we should do, that should be a vote. Just put it on Twitter.
I'll tell you one thing that is a vote. And I swear we're wrapping this up. But I'll tell you one thing that will be interesting. Last that I saw, the NFL is getting dangerously close to a 17-game season. Which, of course, has fantasy implications. The obvious, easy default would just be that we extend our regular season by 1 week. However, there will probably be some radical suggestions, probably by the person on the other side of the coast in this broadcast, about extended playoff formats and bigger brackets and more teams. He's probably going to propose some March Madness tournament. So I am sure that that's one thing that we haven't talked about, that this offseason we may need to talk about, depending on how the NFL formalizes that rule in 2020.
Well, I mean, if baseball, Major League Baseball, can talk about having doubleheaders where they end 7 innings and even start extra innings with a runner on second base, anything is possible.
Indeed. And as Garcia said, and I will kind of cap off by saying, 2020 was not remarkable. All right, 2020 was far from remarkable. In fact, it was a difficult year for many people for many different reasons. And one of the things I love about fantasy football, and this league in particular, is that it has that ability to take away some of that on any given week, whether it's the Tuesday show or the Wednesday waiver wire or the conversations into the weekend, certainly Sundays and Mondays. It makes everything just mean a little more. It takes away those distractions, and it makes you really just enjoy this game that much more. Not always, certainly. There are definitely times where you hate it, but it definitely more than makes up for it when it goes well, and it's really just about the league that we've built. Guys, we're going into our 10th season. I'm sure we'll talk all about that in a few months, but we're going into our 10th season in OTB. I don't think anyone envisioned that it would get to where it's already gotten to after 9 years, and it's because of you guys. It is because of the energy and the intellectual curiosity and the passion and the fun and the banter that you put into this league. We are only here because you're willing to watch it, and so I appreciate you guys. Again, thank you for a fantastic OTB 2020. We will be in that hiatus mode now for a few months. We will come back, of course, and do it even better, even bigger, and try to one-up ourselves every step of the way, as we always do, particularly in the 10th year. He's Garcia out on the West Coast. Sidebar out on the East Coast. Thank you again, OTB. We will see you this spring.